Let me tell you a secret that most people don't realize until it's too late. The avoidant, the one who keeps you at arm's length, who retreats when things get deep, is obsessed with the super empath. No, I know what you're thinking. If they're obsessed, why do they keep pulling away? Because obsession and emotional safety are two different things. You see, the super empath, the person who feels deeply, who understands before words are even spoken, who loves without conditions, represents something terrifying to the avoidant: authentic connection. The super empath is like a mirror, and when an avoidant looks into that mirror, they're confronted with everything they've buried: vulnerability, fear of abandonment, and the story they've been telling themselves about love not being safe. But here's the twist. What the avoidant runs from is exactly what they crave. Because no one sees them the way the super empath does. No one holds space for their wounds like they do. And deep down, they know this kind of love is rare. So they hover, they breadcrumb. They create just enough closeness to feel the warmth, but not enough to melt their armor. They're not addicted to you, they're addicted to the feeling you give them, the safety, the unconditionality, the emotional oxygen they've never learned to breathe. But don't confuse obsession with devotion. Obsession comes from lack, devotion comes from healing. And here's what I want you to remember. If you're the super empath, you have to learn this truth. You can't rescue someone who's committed to resisting love. Your superpower isn't your empathy alone, it's your boundaries. Because real love doesn't chase emotional fugitives, it invites them to rise. So if they can't meet you in that place of emotional maturity, you don't dim your light to fit their darkness. You walk with compassion, but with clarity. And if they ever do the work, real work, they'll know where to find you. Avoidants are often misunderstood in relationships. On the surface, they seem detached, cold, or uninterested. But underneath that exterior lies a complex emotional world. What draws them irresistibly toward the super empath is not what most people would expect. The super empath offers something the avoidant secretly craves: emotional safety. This isn't the superficial kind of safety that comes from routine or familiarity. It's the deep, soulful safety of being seen, understood, and accepted without conditions. The super empath can sense the avoidant's wounds even when they're unspoken. They have a gift for noticing what others miss: the subtle tension in a glance, the quiet retreat behind a smile, the silent longing hidden beneath indifference. This ability to feel so deeply and offer such non-judgmental understanding is magnetic to the avoidant. But that magnetism comes with a paradox. While the avoidant is drawn to this emotional safety, they are also terrified of what it represents. Emotional safety invites vulnerability. It calls someone to lower their defenses, to let themselves be truly known, flaws and all. For the avoidant, this is where fear kicks in. Vulnerability feels dangerous. Their history, whether shaped by past relationships, childhood experiences, or a deep-seated belief that intimacy equals pain, tells them that opening up will lead to hurt or abandonment. So as much as they are obsessed with the super empath's warmth, they also keep finding reasons to retreat. What makes the pull toward the super empath so powerful is that this kind of person doesn't play games. The super empath's care is real. Their affection isn't transactional or manipulative. They don't love with conditions or keep score. To an avoidant, who may be used to relationships filled with push-pull dynamics or hidden agendas, this authenticity is rare and almost intoxicating. They might find themselves constantly thinking about the super empath, replaying moments of connection, craving that feeling of being accepted. Yet when it comes time to step closer, their internal alarm bells go off, warning them that too much closeness equals risk. This creates a cycle. The avoidant reaches out to feel the warmth, then pulls back to avoid the burn. The super empath becomes both the source of comfort and the trigger for their deepest fears. It's not that the avoidant wants to hurt the super empath or play with their emotions. In truth, they're often at war within themselves, torn between desire and fear. The super empath's emotional safety feels like home, but a home they don't believe they deserve or can trust to last. This internal conflict is what fuels their obsession, keeping them circling around the very connection they can't seem to claim. The super empath doesn't just hear what someone says, they feel what's left unsaid. This is what makes them so powerful and at the same time so confronting for the avoidant. The avoidant has spent much of their emotional life carefully controlling how much of themselves they reveal. They've mastered the art of showing just enough to seem present, but not enough to feel truly vulnerable. But when they encounter a super empath, that entire strategy starts to unravel. The empath sees straight through the facade. They don't need explanations or dramatic confessions. They just know. This awareness unsettles the avoidant. Most people let them get away with the act, the distance, the emotional vagueness, but not the super empath. They might not say it out loud, but their energy communicates something very different. I see you. And being seen so clearly, so deeply, without effort or permission, can feel like exposure to someone who has survived by hiding. The super empath becomes a mirror, reflecting back the avoidant's emotions, fears, and suppressed desires in ways the avoidant isn't ready to acknowledge. It's not that the empath is trying to confront them, it's just who they are. Their emotional intelligence picks up on shifts in tone, silence, micro expressions. They can feel when someone is afraid of closeness. They sense when someone is pushing love away while silently begging for it. That level of intuitive presence can make the avoidant feel simultaneously seen and vulnerable, understood and defensive. What's particularly disarming is the super empath's lack of judgment. They don't use their insight to shame or manipulate. They offer understanding. And that understanding hits harder than criticism ever could. It forces the avoidant to confront the disconnect between who they present to the world and what they truly feel inside. Suddenly, the tactics they've used to stay safe, detachment, aloofness, independence, start to feel small and inadequate. The problem is, the avoidant has often gone years without looking in this mirror. They've constructed their identity around control and emotional distance. The super empath effortlessly threatens that identity simply by being present. That's why the avoidant starts to feel a kind of internal panic. It's not just about the relationship. It's about what this connection is revealing about themselves. And while that level of exposure can ultimately be healing, it's also terrifying for someone who isn't ready to face it. The super empath becomes a living reminder of the emotional truths the avoidant has tried to bury. And this reflection is both the source of the avoidant's obsession and their urge to run. Obsession and love are often mistaken for the same thing, but they come from entirely different emotional roots. When an avoidant becomes obsessed with a super empath, it's not about true love. It's about an emotional craving. It's about longing for something they don't know how to hold. Obsession grows out of a space of lack, a need that feels urgent and unfulfilled. It's a hunger, not a commitment. The avoidant doesn't necessarily want to build a life with the super empath. They're magnetized by how the empath makes them feel safe, understood, seen. It's a powerful emotional experience, especially for someone who's never truly allowed themselves to be emotionally open. The super empath often gives without asking much in return: love, patience, emotional availability, deep understanding. To someone with avoidant tendencies who may have learned early on that emotions are dangerous or unreliable, this kind of unconditional care can feel like standing in the sun for the first time. It's warming, healing, but also overwhelming. Instead of meeting the empath on the same level of emotional availability, the avoidant often responds by attaching through obsession rather than connection. They think about the empath constantly. They replay conversations. They may even feel jealous or possessive, but they rarely lean in with presence and openness. What they're attached to isn't the actual relationship, it's the idea of the emotional comfort they receive from it. They're trying to hold on to a feeling, not a person. That's why the obsession intensifies when the super empath pulls away or sets boundaries. The avoidant begins to panic, not because they're losing a partner they've nurtured a deep bond with, but because they're losing their emotional anchor. They haven't done the inner work to create safety within themselves, so they project that need onto the empath. This kind of obsession can be misleading. It creates intense energy, strong emotions, and a persistent focus on the other person, but it's not grounded in real intimacy. Real love requires reciprocity, emotional effort, and vulnerability. Obsession skips all of that. It focuses on the feeling the other person creates without stepping into the mutual growth required for a healthy relationship. The super empath often mistakes this obsession for intensity, for passion, for hidden love, but it's actually fear dressed up as desire. The avoidant doesn't know how to hold emotional closeness without feeling threatened by it, so they grasp at it from a distance, romanticizing what they can't regulate. That's why it's not love, it's emotional survival. Avoidants often exist in a constant state of emotional contradiction. They crave connection, yet fear the vulnerability that connection requires. This internal conflict is why they often engage in behaviors like breadcrumbing or hovering. It's not always malicious or manipulative. It's usually unconscious. To someone with avoidant tendencies, too much closeness feels unsafe, while too much distance feels lonely. So they stay in the in-between space, giving just enough to keep the super empath close, but not enough to fully commit or be emotionally present. Breadcrumbing isn't always about control. Sometimes it's about fear management. The avoidant offers small pieces of affection, moments of attention, or occasional vulnerability to maintain a sense of connection without having to fully step into intimacy. They'll send a text after days of silence, ask about your day just when you start to detach, or share a personal detail that makes you think they're finally opening up, but then they retreat again. It creates a cycle of hope and disappointment. This dynamic is especially painful for a super empath, who naturally looks for meaning, emotional depth, and consistency. Hovering is another way the avoidant stays emotionally adjacent without ever fully engaging. They might watch your stories, like your posts, or pop up randomly in your life, just enough to remind you they're still there, but not enough to rebuild trust or move the relationship forward. To the super empath, this behavior feels confusing. It stirs hope, reignites emotional attachment, and often delays the decision to walk away. That's the trap. The avoidant isn't trying to mislead. Their nervous system is trying to find a balance between feeling close and staying safe. But that version of safety is rooted in avoidance, not in love. For the super empath, these mixed signals can be deeply draining. They interpret the avoidant's brief moments of connection as signs of growth or readiness. They want to believe the avoidant is finally choosing them, finally pushing through their fear. But most often, the avoidant is only reaching out to soothe their own discomfort, not to show up in a new way. They're responding to their own loneliness, not your needs. This dance between closeness and distance isn't romantic. It's dysregulating. And yet, it keeps both people locked in a loop. The avoidant doesn't want to lose the empath, but they also don't want to confront what true emotional intimacy would require. So they settle into a limbo that feels safe to them, but emotionally chaotic to the person who simply wants to love and be loved in return. The super empath's strength is often mistaken for weakness. Because they feel so deeply, care so naturally, and give so generously, people assume they will always stay, always forgive, always try one more time. And for a while, that's true. The super empath will hold space for the avoidant even when it hurts. They will be patient when others would walk away. They will listen even when the words aren't said. But what many don't realize is that beneath that ocean of empathy is an iron core, one made of self-respect, clarity, and quiet strength. Super empaths love with intensity, but they are not naive. They can tell when someone is emotionally unavailable. They notice when connection becomes one-sided. They feel the emptiness that comes from constantly pouring into someone who only takes. And while they may not react immediately, they're always observing. They are constantly measuring the emotional temperature of the relationship. And once it becomes clear that their empathy is being used as a cushion for someone else's avoidance, something shifts inside them. That shift is where their true power lies. Not in how much they can feel, but in how well they can protect what they feel. Boundaries are not the opposite of empathy. They are the guardian of it. The super empath learns, sometimes painfully, that without boundaries, their love becomes self-sacrifice. They realize that loving someone who cannot love them back in a consistent and healthy way is not compassion, it's self-abandonment. This is where the super empath's evolution begins. They stop trying to fix. They stop waiting for potential. They stop hoping that their emotional availability will inspire the avoidant to change. Instead, they turn inward. They start asking harder questions. What am I allowing? What am I accepting that I would never recommend to someone I love? Why am I settling for emotional breadcrumbs when I deserve a feast? The avoidant may not expect this shift. They've often confused the empath's patience with passivity. They don't realize that empathy doesn't mean endless tolerance. So when the super empath finally walks away, not in anger, not with drama, but with quiet certainty, it shakes the avoidant to their core. Because for the first time, the empath chooses themselves. Not out of spite, but out of truth. They recognize that their energy is sacred, and giving it to someone who cannot meet them emotionally is a slow erosion of their spirit. Their boundary becomes their declaration. I will not shrink myself for someone who fears expansion. A relationship can only thrive when both people are emotionally available. It doesn't matter how deep one person's love is, how much they're willing to give, or how patient they are. If the other person isn't emotionally present, the connection will always be unbalanced. The super empath often enters relationships with a heart wide open. They come with understanding, readiness, and a deep desire to nurture and connect. But when they pair with an avoidant who operates from a place of emotional protection and fear, the empath ends up doing all the emotional labor. The avoidant may want closeness in theory, but in practice, they resist it. They often haven't done the internal work necessary to feel safe in intimacy. They might carry unresolved wounds from childhood, previous betrayals, or a belief that vulnerability makes them weak. Because of this, they show up inconsistently. They pull away when things get too real. They shut down instead of communicating. They sabotage intimacy just as it begins to deepen. And every time they do, the empath tries to fill the gap with more love, more understanding, more patience, believing that if they just give a little more, the avoidant will finally feel safe enough to stay. But emotional availability isn't something one partner can provide for both people. It's not transferable. The avoidant has to do the healing themselves. They have to look at their own fears, question their patterns, and decide to stop running from real connection. That's not something the empath can do for them. No amount of love can substitute for the personal decision to become emotionally responsible and present. The danger is that the super empath often waits too long. They see the potential in the avoidant. They feel the moments of tenderness, the glimpses of vulnerability, and they believe those moments will eventually grow into consistency. But moments don't build relationships, habits do. And if someone's habit is avoidance, fear, or emotional withdrawal, then those rare moments of connection are not enough. For a relationship to last, both people need to show up, not just physically, but emotionally. Have less moments. They need to be able to have hard conversations, to be honest about fears, to offer reassurance, and to choose each other again and again. When only one person is doing that, the relationship becomes a performance rather than a partnership. Healing isn't optional, it's essential. Without it, love can't breathe. And without emotional availability on both sides, even the strongest connection eventually becomes unsustainable. So here's what we've uncovered. The avoidant isn't cold, they're scared. The super empath isn't too much, they're a mirror, a healer, a truth teller. And when these two meet, it creates a powerful emotional charge, but not always a healthy bond. Obsession is not devotion. Craving is not commitment. And being emotionally drawn to someone doesn't mean they're meant to stay in your life. To the super empath, your love is not the problem. Your depth is not the issue. But it is your responsibility to protect your heart from people who don't yet know how to hold it. You can see someone's wounds without making them your home. You can love someone's potential without sacrificing your peace for it. Let this be the truth you carry forward. Empathy is your gift. Boundaries are your power. And real love, mutual, grounded, healthy love, will never ask you to abandon yourself to earn it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. And most of all, thank you for honoring the kind of love that starts within you first. Take care of your heart. It's sacred. Until next time, be well and never settle for a connection that asks you to shrink.